York, for the next 4 years, there will be a lot to cover and report on in the category of norm busting and grifting. Unqualified individuals doing previously unheard of things atop government agencies. While Donald Trump crows about a so-called mandate and Republicans in Congress feel around for whatever remains of their sense of duty and accountability to the Constitution and the rule of law. For that reason, it will be important to track mile markers or signposts along various trajectories. One we have focused on a whole lot around here is democratic norms versus autocratic impulses. And in that category, Donald Trump made a very big move yesterday, tapping someone who departs perhaps as dramatically as any other pick from the normal parameters for the individual overseeing the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. In her case, Trump is letting the fox guard the henhouse, tapping a loyalist who has at every single turn since the 2020 election and the emergence of the big lie enabled Donald Trump's attacks on voting and democratic norms in the name of Trump's lie about voter fraud leading to his defeat in 2020. Her name is Harmeet Dillon, and she is Donald Trump's pick to lead the DOJ Civil Rights Division. It's a branch of the Justice Department the New York Times describes like this, quote, "The division enforces voting rights laws, investigates police departments, and brings charges for violations of people's civil rights." The division's own website proudly states this, quote, "We uphold the civil rights of all people in the United States." It is a solemn and important responsibility. If there is a through line in Dillon's legal work over the last few years, it is that she has supported Donald Trump over anything and everyone else. New York Times writes this, quote, "Ms. Dillon has been a conservative activist so devoted to Mr. Trump that she was willing to attack not only Democrats, but also fellow Republicans. She was also the co-chairwoman in 2020 of a group, Lawyers for Trump, that challenged the results of that year's presidential election. Here she is in an appearance on Fox News on November 5th, 2020. While votes were still being counted, President Joe Biden would not be declared the winner for another 2 days. Watch.
In Philadelphia, you have election workers with Biden-Harris 2020 masks on, and they're the ones who look at ballots and they see if a ballot is defective in some way. They may fill it in or fix it, and there's nobody on the Republican side to witness it. And because that election is so close and because the president's lead is declining, that is where we could lose it. And it is an outrage that those people are in contempt of court. And meanwhile, we're waiting for the United States Supreme Court, of which the president has nominated 3 justices to step in and do something. And hopefully Amy Coney Barrett will come through and pick it up. There's no guarantee of that, Lou. So we have to fight this on the ground and make sure that we challenge in every place we are.
Hopefully Amy Coney Barrett will come through. Of course, the Supreme Court doesn't step in, Amy Coney Barrett or any of them, and do much of anything. They do not tip the scales for Donald Trump because Donald Trump lost. But Dillon remained a loyal, legal foot soldier and spokesperson as Trump tried and failed to overturn the election and lost case after case after case, up to 60 of them. Here's how Mark Elias's Democracy Docket describes what she has done since then, since the 2020 election. Quote, "Dillon and her namesake law firm she founded in 2006 has become one of the leading legal groups working to roll back voting rights across the country. In the past few years, Dillon, or an attorney from her law firm, has been involved in at least 16 different lawsuits in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Maine, Michigan, North Carolina, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., challenging voting rights laws, redistricting, election processes, or Trump's efforts to appear on the ballot in the 2024 election. In a statement, Dillon says that she is, quote, honored by President Trump's nomination to assist with our nation's civil rights agenda, but many experts see it quite differently. Mark Elias warns that with Dillon at the head of DOJ's Civil Rights Division, quote, DOJ will be on the side of vote suppressors and election deniers, an early and important indicator of what the next chapter of the fight for voting rights will look like in the United States. With Trump's latest DOJ appointment is where we start today. The aforementioned Mark Elias is here, voting rights attorney and founder of the site Democracy Docket. Also joining us, MSNBC legal analyst and NYU law professor Melissa Murray. Mark, first, just take one step back and remind us what is in the purview of the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice.
Yeah, so it's a big job, and it covers, as you point out, the enforcement of the nation's civil rights laws involving discrimination, policing, lots and lots of things. But the thing that I am mostly focused on, or the thing that immediately jumped off the page for me, is that voting rights falls within this purview. And that jumps off the page because Harmeet Dillon ran for chair of the RNC against Ronna McDaniel on a platform of voter suppression, what she calls election integrity, complaining that the Republican Party was not doing enough after 2020 to put partisan poll watchers at the polls, was not doing enough to fight against vote by mail and other forms of voting, was not doing enough to fight against civil rights and voting rights organizations in court. And the idea that she is now going to be put in charge of the Civil Rights Division and oversee the voting rights section at a time when you have the election denier in chief in the Oval Office, at a time when Project 2025 wants to dismantle voting rights around the country, at a time when, frankly, the courts and voting rights are one of the few places we have to fight to ensure free and fair elections in the future, is beyond absurd. It is something out of Kafka novel.
Can you explain, too, DOJ's role in defending legislation that is suppressive or that would infringe on anyone's voting rights? DOJ normally is the body, those lawyers, the lawyers who work in the Civil Rights Division, defend those cases. What happens to those cases, Mark?
Yeah, so this is my great fear, and it's the reason why I sent that message, by the way, on Blue Sky, not on X. I'm getting off X, but Blue Sky. I recommend it to everyone. But the fear that I have is that the Department of Justice, one of their missions in these cases is to ensure that the nation's voting laws are upheld. And that's both the Voting Rights Act, but it's also a number of other very, very important voting laws. They are the chief cop on the beat to ensure that people's right to vote is not infringed upon. And, you know, look, Nicole, over the last few years, you and I have had a number of back and forth about whether or not Merrick Garland was doing enough in this area. And I think, you know, many people thought he and the department could have done more. But they are in a number of cases where my fear is that on January 20th at noon, the position of the United States will flip. It will flip from a position of protecting black voters from discrimination under the Voting Rights Act into one that seeks to gut the last provisions of the Voting Rights Act. It will flip on laws like the Help America Vote Act. It will flip on laws like the provisions that prevent discrimination against our military and overseas voters into positions that are antithetical to those interests. And this is not hypothetical, by the way. It is the Republican National Committee itself that is oftentimes trying to gut these very laws and trying to urge courts to adopt positions that would restrict voting rights. And I fear that the fact that the Department of Justice is in some of these cases will give an on-ramp. I'd much rather the Department of Justice dismiss their cases, take themselves out of interventions that they're in, so that at least Harmeet Dillon is going to have to find lawyers at DOJ to file pleadings to get into cases, and will face some speed bumps.
And just to finish the thought, what does she do if DOJ, if Merrick Garland doesn't heed your warning? These cases are open. She wants to do, as you say, flip sides. Then what would happen?
Well, look, then you're putting folks like my clients and my law firm and many, many other civil rights organizations in the position of now having to fight not just the state vote suppressors, not just the Republican Party and their allies who are, election deniers, but now we are also fighting the tax-funded Department of Justice, who will be advancing positions, like I said, antithetical to their core mission, which is ensuring the right to vote. It is both a drain on resources. It is also going to cause a lot of confusion, I think, among judges, although hopefully they will see through it. Some of the judges may play confused about what the Department of Justice is doing.